The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Daniel finally locked up the campus convenience store. His shift had been longer than usual because someone called in sick, and now his feet ached like they always did after standing for 8 hours straight. He pulled his worn jacket tighter against the November cold and started the 20-minute walk back to his apartment. 22 years old, junior year of college, and he had exactly $47 in his checking account. Daniel knew because he'd checked it 3 times that day, hoping somehow the number would magically change. It never did. His rent was due in 5 days and he was still $200 short. The math wasn't adding up no matter how many times he calculated it in his head. He thought about calling his mom but quickly pushed that idea away. She was already working 2 jobs back home to support his younger sister. He couldn't add to her stress. Besides, he was supposed to be the responsible one, the first in their family to go to college. Asking for money felt like admitting he couldn't handle it. The park was quiet at this hour. Daniel usually avoided it at night, but tonight he was too tired to take the longer route. The bare trees cast long shadows under the streetlights, and frost was already forming on the grass. He could see his breath in the cold air. Just 15 more minutes and he'd be home. Then maybe he could finally work on that engineering assignment that was due tomorrow. Sleep could wait. That's when he heard it, a splash. Then desperate, high-pitched screaming. Daniel's exhaustion vanished in an instant. He ran toward the sound, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The screaming was coming from the pond near the center of the park. His heart pounded as he got closer and saw what was happening. A little girl was in the water. Even in the dim light, he could see her struggling, her small arms thrashing as she tried to keep her head above the surface. The ice around the edges of the pond had broken, and she was trapped in the freezing water about 15 feet from the shore. "Help! Please help," she cried out, her voice breaking with terror and cold. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. He dropped his backpack and phone on the ground and kicked off his shoes. The logical part of his brain tried to tell him this was dangerous, that he should call for help first, but there wasn't time. The girl was already going under. The water hit him like 1,000 knives. It was so cold it knocked the breath right out of his lungs. Daniel gasped but forced himself to keep moving forward, breaking through the thin ice as he waded deeper. His clothes became heavy instantly, dragging him down, but he pushed through the shock and the cold. "I'm coming, hold on," he shouted, trying to keep his voice steady even though his teeth were already chattering. The girl went under just as he reached her. Daniel dove beneath the surface, the cold water like fire against his face. His fingers found fabric, then an arm. He grabbed hold and pulled upward with everything he had. They broke the surface together. The girl was coughing and sputtering, her lips already turning blue. Daniel wrapped one arm around her and used the other to pull them both toward the shore. Each movement felt like pushing through concrete. His muscles were seizing up from the cold and his soaked clothes felt like they weighed 100 pounds. "Stay with me," he told her, his voice shaking. "We're almost there." It couldn't have been more than 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour before his feet finally touched the muddy bottom near the shore. He half-walked, half-crawled out of the water, still holding the girl. Once they were on solid ground, he laid her down gently on the frost-covered grass. She wasn't breathing right. Her chest was barely moving and water was coming from her mouth. Daniel's mind raced back to the CPR class he'd taken freshman year. It had been required for all students and he'd barely paid attention, thinking he'd never need it. Now he needed it desperately. He tilted her head back, checked her airway, and started chest compressions. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, kid, breathe. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths." His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep count, but he kept going. The cold was making it hard to think, hard to remember the right rhythm. Then she coughed. Water came up and she gasped for air. Her eyes opened wide and terrified, and she started crying. Daniel nearly cried too from relief. He rolled her onto her side as she coughed up more water, gently patting her back. "You're okay," he said softly. "You're going to be okay." That's when he heard running footsteps and frantic shouting. A woman in her 50s came sprinting toward them, her face white with panic. "Lily, oh my God, Lily!" The woman dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaming down her face. I only looked away for a second. She was chasing her dog and I couldn't see where she went and, "Oh God, thank you so much." Daniel was shaking uncontrollably now, his wet clothes freezing against his skin. "Call 911, he managed to say. "She needs to get checked out." The woman was already pulling out her phone with trembling hands. Other people were arriving now, drawn by the commotion. Someone draped a jacket over Daniel's shoulders. Someone else was wrapping the little girl in a coat. Everything became a blur of voices and movement. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They checked the girl over, wrapped her in warming blankets, and loaded her into the ambulance. The woman who must have been her nanny climbed in beside her, still crying and thanking Daniel over and over. Police officers took Daniel's statement. He told them what happened, shivering so hard he could barely get the words out. They kept calling him a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He just felt cold and tired and worried about the little girl. One of the officers drove him home after making sure he didn't need medical attention. Daniel insisted he was fine, even though he wasn't sure that was true. He just wanted to go home, take a hot shower, and forget this night had happened. Back in his apartment, Daniel stood under the hottest water his cheap shower could produce until the shaking finally stopped. His phone had been ruined by the water, which meant another expense he couldn't afford. Perfect. He dried off and checked the time. 1:30 a.m. His assignment was still due in the morning, and he hadn't even started it. Daniel sat down at his desk and opened his laptop, trying to focus on differential equations, but his mind kept replaying those moments in the water. The girl's terrified face, the awful cold, the feeling of her tiny body not breathing. He wondered if she was okay, if she was warm and safe now, if she'd be scared of water forever. He didn't even know her full name, just Lily. Daniel finished his assignment at 4 a.m. and fell into bed without setting an alarm. He'd deal with being late to class tomorrow. Tonight he just needed to sleep and stop shaking. He had no idea that jumping into that freezing pond was about to change everything in his life. No idea that the little girl he saved wasn't just any child, and no idea that 3 days later his entire world would turn upside down in ways he never could have imagined. But that night, as he finally drifted off to sleep, Daniel was just a broke college student who'd done what anyone would do. He'd seen someone who needed help, and he'd helped them. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. 3 days had passed since that night at the pond, and Daniel was trying to get back to normal. His phone was still dead, which meant he'd spent most of his remaining money on a cheap replacement. Now he had $32 to his name, and rent was due in 2 days. He'd picked up an extra shift at the store, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He was sitting at his tiny kitchen table eating ramen noodles for the 3rd day in a row when someone knocked on his door. Daniel frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. His roommate had moved out last month, leaving him to cover the full rent alone, and none of his friends ever just dropped by his place. When he opened the door, Daniel froze. 2 people stood in the hallway, and they definitely didn't belong in his rundown apartment building. The man wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Daniel's entire semester tuition. The woman beside him was equally well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had never seen the inside of a discount store. "Daniel Rodriguez?" the man asked, extending his hand. His voice was smooth and professional. Yeah, that's me." Daniel shook his hand hesitantly, very aware of his old t-shirt and sweatpants. "My name is Richard Chen. I'm the attorney for the Westbrook family. This is Catherine Mills, the family's private secretary. May we come in?" Daniel's brain struggled to catch up. Westbrook family. He stepped aside and let them in, suddenly embarrassed by his apartment. There were textbooks scattered everywhere, dishes in the sink, and his futon couch had a spring poking through one cushion. If they noticed, they were too polite to show it. Richard and Catherine sat down on the futon while Daniel grabbed the only chair from his kitchen table. "I'm sure you're wondering why we're here," Richard began. 3 nights ago, you saved a young girl from drowning in Jefferson Park. Her name is Lily Westbrook." Daniel nodded slowly. "Is she okay?" "I've been worried about her." Catherine smiled warmly. "She's perfectly fine, thanks to you. The doctor said if you hadn't acted as quickly as you did, if you hadn't known CPR." She didn't finish the sentence, but Daniel understood. "I'm glad she's okay. That's all that matters." Richard leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, do you know who the Westbrook family is?" "Should I?" Daniel asked honestly. He didn't have time to keep up with rich people news. He was too busy trying to survive. Richard and Catherine exchanged a glance. Robert Westbrook was one of the most successful industrialists in the country, Richard explained. His company, Westbrook Industries, manufactures everything from medical equipment to renewable energy technology. The family is worth approximately $2.3 billion. Daniel's mouth went dry. Billion? With a B? With a B, Catherine confirmed. Robert and his wife Diana died in a plane crash 6 months ago. Lily is their only child. She's 8 years old, and she's the sole heir to the entire Westbrook fortune. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Daniel gripped the arms of his chair. I had no idea. We know you didn't, Richard said. That's part of why we're here. After the incident, we conducted a thorough background check on you. I hope you don't mind. Daniel's stomach dropped. A background check? Standard procedure, Catherine assured him quickly. When someone enters Lily's life, especially given her circumstances, we need to be careful. You understand? I guess so. Daniel felt weird about strangers investigating him, but he supposed he couldn't blame them. Richard pulled out a folder from Catherine's briefcase and opened it. Daniel Rodriguez, 22 years old, junior at State University, studying mechanical engineering. GPA of 3.7 despite working 30 hours a week. First-generation college student. Father passed away from cancer when you were 16. Mother works as a nurse's aide and hotel housekeeper. Younger sister in high school. No criminal record. No debt beyond student loans. By all accounts, you're exactly what you appear to be. A good kid working hard to build a better life. Hearing his life summarized like that made Daniel feel exposed and small. Why are you telling me all this? Catherine spoke up. Because Lily's guardian wants to meet you, to thank you properly, and to discuss something important. Who's her guardian? Her uncle, James Westbrook, Robert's younger brother. He's taken custody of Lily and is managing her trust until she turns 18. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Look, I appreciate the thanks, but I don't need anything. I just did what anyone would do. Not anyone, Richard said quietly. The police report said the water was 38 degrees. You jumped in without hesitation, without even calling for help first. You risked your own life without thinking twice. That's not what everyone would do, Daniel. That's exceptional. Daniel's cheeks heated up. He didn't know what to say to that. Catherine pulled out an envelope from the briefcase. Mr. Westbrook would like to invite you to dinner at the family estate this Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. He understands you're a student with work obligations, but he hopes you can make time. She handed him the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation on heavy cream-colored paper with elegant printing. There was also something else. Daniel pulled it out and his eyes widened. It was a check for $5,000. What? I can't accept this, Daniel said immediately, trying to hand it back. Richard held up his hand. That's for your phone and any other expenses from that night. Consider it compensation for damages, not a reward. Your phone was destroyed helping Lily. This simply makes you whole. It's $5,000. My phone cost $200. Then consider the rest a thank you for missing work and classes while you recovered, Catherine said smoothly. Please, Mr. Westbrook would be insulted if you refused. Daniel stared at the check. $5,000 would cover his rent for months. It would let him eat something other than ramen. It would mean he could maybe, finally, breathe a little. But accepting it felt wrong somehow, like he was being paid for doing the right thing. The dinner invitation is separate from the check, Richard added, seeming to read Daniel's mind. You can accept one without the other. But James Westbrook is a good man who lost his brother and sister-in-law 6 months ago. He's trying to raise his niece while managing a massive company and an estate that employs over 50 people. He just wants to meet the person who saved the only family he has left. Can you give him that? When he put it that way, Daniel felt like refusing would be cruel. Okay, I'll come to dinner. Catherine smiled. Wonderful. A car will pick you up at 6:30 Saturday evening. The dress code is business casual. Do you have... She paused delicately. Appropriate clothes? Daniel finished for her. I have one decent button-down shirt and some khakis I wear to job interviews. Perfect, she said warmly. though Daniel suspected she was just being nice. That will be fine. After they left, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, holding the check and staring at it like it might disappear. $5,000. He could frame his college diploma with money like this, buy a reliable laptop instead of his dying one, maybe even visit his mom and sister. He thought about Lily, that terrified little girl in the water. She was a billionaire, an actual billionaire. Well, she would be someday. Right now, she was just a kid who'd lost her parents and almost died. Daniel had grown up with nothing and had fought for every opportunity. Lily had been born with everything and had lost what mattered most. They couldn't be more different, yet somehow their lives had crashed together in those freezing waters. Saturday came faster than Daniel expected. He spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, trying to make his 3-year-old khakis and slightly wrinkled shirt look presentable. When the car arrived, it wasn't a normal car. It was a sleek black town car with a professional driver who called him Sir and opened the door for him. The drive took 40 minutes, leaving the city behind and entering an area where houses became estates and lawns stretched on forever. Daniel watched through the window, feeling like he'd entered a different world. When they turned through iron gates and up a long driveway, Daniel's jaw dropped. The Westbrook estate wasn't a house. It was a mansion straight out of a movie. 3 stories of white stone, massive windows, perfectly manicured gardens even in November. There were actual columns by the front door. Holy. Daniel breathed. The driver smiled slightly in the rearview mirror. Impressive, isn't it? The house has 42 rooms. 42 rooms. Daniel's entire apartment could probably fit in their garage. A woman in a professional black dress greeted him at the door and led him through a marble foyer. Real marble. Daniel was afraid to touch anything. There were paintings on the walls that looked old and expensive, and a chandelier overhead that sparkled like something from a palace. "Mr. Rodriguez," the woman said, leading him to a sitting room. "Mr. Westbrook will be down shortly. Please make yourself comfortable." She disappeared, leaving Daniel alone in a room that was bigger than his entire apartment. He sat carefully, on the edge of a chair that looked like an antique, afraid he might break something just by breathing wrong. Then he heard running footsteps and excited voices from the hallway. The door burst open and Lily came running in. She looked completely different from the last time he'd seen her. Her blonde hair was in pigtails, she wore a bright pink dress, and her cheeks were rosy and healthy. When she saw Daniel, her whole face lit up. "You came. Uncle James said you might come, but I wasn't sure." She ran straight to him. Daniel stood up, and Lily threw her arms around him in a tight hug. For a moment, all the weirdness and discomfort melted away. This was why he was here. This little girl was alive and happy. "Hi, Lily," he said softly. "It's good to see you doing so well." A man appeared in the doorway. He was in his 40s, with kind eyes and the same blonde hair as Lily, though his was streaked with gray. He wore casual clothes, just jeans and a sweater, which made Daniel feel slightly less out of place. "Lily, let the poor man breathe," he said with a gentle smile. Then he walked over and extended his hand to Daniel. "I'm James Westbrook. Thank you for coming, and thank you for saving my niece's life." His handshake was firm but warm. His eyes were sincere. In that moment, Daniel stopped seeing a billionaire and just saw an uncle who loved his niece. "I'm glad I was there," Daniel said simply. James smiled. "Come on, dinner's ready. And I promise this is going to be the most normal evening you can have in a 42-room house." As they walked to the dining room, Lily held Daniel's hand and chattered excitedly about her art class and her dog, and how she'd learned the state capitals. She was just a regular kid, despite living in a palace. Daniel realized that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as uncomfortable as he'd thought. He had no idea that this dinner would lead to an offer that would change everything, that this little girl holding his hand would become one of the most important people in his life, that this family's problems would soon become his problems. But right now, walking through a mansion with a happy 8-year-old chattering beside him, Daniel just felt grateful that he'd jumped into that freezing water. Some decisions change everything. We just don't know it at the time. Dinner was served in a dining room with a table that could easily seat 20 people, though tonight it was just the three of them clustered at one end. Daniel tried not to stare at the fancy plates and the multiple forks beside his plate. He had no idea which fork to use for what, but he noticed James just picked one up casually, so Daniel did the same. The food was incredible, nothing like the ramen and frozen pizzas Daniel lived on. But what struck him most was how normal the conversation felt. James asked about his classes, his major, what he wanted to do after graduation. Lily interrupted constantly with her own questions, wanting to know everything about college life. "Do you live in a big building with lots of other students?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I used to, my first year," Daniel explained. "Now I have my own apartment. Well, I'm supposed to have a roommate, but he moved out, so it's just me." "Don't you get lonely?" Lily asked. The question was so direct and honest that it caught Daniel off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm usually too busy to think about it much." James had been quiet, just listening. Now he spoke up. "Daniel, can I ask you something personal?" "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Sure. Why engineering? And specifically, why renewable energy? Catherine mentioned that was your focus." Daniel set down his fork, thinking about how to explain. "My dad worked in a factory his whole life. Manufacturing plant. The conditions weren't great and the chemicals they used. That's probably what made him sick. Cancer. He died when I was 16. "I'm sorry," James said quietly. Lily's face fell. "Thanks. Anyway, before he got really sick, he used to talk about how the world needed to change, needed cleaner energy, better technology, ways to make things without poisoning people or the planet. He never got to see any of that change, but I figured maybe I could help make it happen. That's why I'm studying engineering. I want to design systems that don't hurt people." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Lily said softly, "Your dad sounds like he was really smart." Daniel smiled. "He was. He never went to college, but he was the smartest person I knew." "My parents were smart too," Lily said, her voice small. "They helped lots of people with their company. Uncle James says they made things that help doctors save lives and machines that use the sun for power." "They did," James confirmed. "Robert believed in exactly what you're talking about, Daniel. Clean technology, sustainable manufacturing. He poured billions into research." After dinner, James invited Daniel to his study while Lily went upstairs to do homework with her tutor. The study was lined with books and had a huge desk with multiple computer monitors. It looked like a working space, not just for show. James poured 2 glasses of water and sat down in one of the leather chairs, gesturing for Daniel to take the other. "I need to be honest with you about something," he began. "Inviting you here wasn't just about saying thank you." Daniel had suspected as much. "Okay, Lily's situation is complicated. She's 8 years old and worth over $2 billion. Her parents are gone. She has a team of tutors, therapists, trustees, lawyers, and staff, but what she doesn't have is normalcy. She doesn't have friends her age. She can't go to regular school because of security concerns and media attention. She's isolated in this big house with adults who are paid to be here." Daniel listened, seeing the strain on James's face. "Since the accident, she's been withdrawn. Sad. Her therapist says she's coping as well as can be expected, but she's just going through the motions. Then you saved her life and something changed. She talks about you constantly, about how you were just a regular person who helped her, about your stories of college and working and real life outside these walls. She's a great kid," Daniel said honestly. "She is, and she needs more than what we're giving her here. She needs someone who can show her that life isn't just about money and estates and board meetings, someone who can teach her about the real world." James paused. "She needs a mentor, and I'd like that person to be you." Daniel blinked. "Me, I'm just a college student. I barely have my own life together." "Exactly. You're young enough to relate to her, but old enough to be a role model. You work hard. You're pursuing your dreams despite obstacles, and you've shown you have integrity. We did a thorough background check, Daniel. You could have sold your story to the media for serious money. Student saves billionaire heir. That's headline material. But you didn't. You just went back to your life." "That would have been gross," Daniel said. "Using a kid's trauma for money? No way, see? That's exactly what I'm talking about." James leaned forward. "I'm offering you a position. 3 days a week you'd come here and spend time with Lily. Help with her homework, especially math and science. Talk to her about your life, your studies. Take her to campus events if you're comfortable with that. Just be a positive presence. The pay would be $2,000 per week. Daniel's mind went blank. $2,000 per week. That was more than he made in a month at the convenience store. That's way too much money for tutoring, he stammered. It's not just tutoring. It's mentoring, companionship, and honestly, it's danger pay. The media would love to get photos of Lily. Some family members might resent your presence. There will be background noise and complications. Plus, you'd need to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. Nothing about Lily or this family can be shared publicly. Ever. Daniel's head was spinning. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. I know it's a lot to process. But Daniel, I watched you at dinner tonight. Lily hasn't smiled like that in 6 months. She hasn't asked questions or gotten excited about anything. You brought something out in her just by being yourself. Can I ask you something? Daniel said, anything. Why do you trust me? You've known me for 3 hours. James smiled slightly. I'm a good judge of character. It's kept me alive in business. But more than that, you jumped into freezing water to save a stranger. You didn't know who she was, what she could offer you, or if anyone would even know what you'd done. You just saw someone who needed help. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Daniel went home that night with a business card, a contract to review, and a head full of thoughts that wouldn't stop spinning. $6,000 a month. That would cover his rent, his food, his tuition, everything. He could stop working at the convenience store. He could focus on his classes. He could send money home to help his mom, but something felt wrong about accepting. Like he was taking advantage of a little girl who'd lost her parents. Like he was selling out somehow. He called his mom on his cheap new phone. She was on break at the hospital where she worked the night shift. Baby, that's wonderful, she said when he explained the offer. Why do you sound so worried? Because it feels like too much. Like I'm using this situation. His mom was quiet for a moment. Let me ask you something. Do you think you could help this little girl? I mean, maybe. She seems to like me. And would you do right by her? Be honest and kind and a good influence? Of course I would. Then you're not using her. You're accepting a job that you're qualified for, and that serves a real need. Daniel, you've been breaking your back working and studying and barely getting by. If someone wants to pay you fairly for work that actually matters, that's not wrong. That's an opportunity. And baby, you deserve opportunities. Your father would want you to take them. That decided it for Daniel. His mom was right. She was always right. The next day, he met with Richard the lawyer, signed the papers, and officially became Lily's mentor and tutor. The first few sessions were at the estate, and they were wonderful. Lily was hungry to learn, asking a million questions about everything. They worked on math problems, but Daniel made them fun, turning fractions into pizza slices and decimals into money calculations. If you have $100 and want to buy 3 games that each cost $29.99, do you have enough? He asked. Lily scrunched up her face, calculating. No. The games would cost $89.97, but with tax it would be more than $100. Exactly. See, you're doing real math without even thinking about it. After their third session, Daniel had an idea.
Hey, would you want to come to campus with me?
There's a science fair this weekend. Lots of cool projects from students. Lily's eyes lit up. Really? I could come to your college? If your uncle says it's okay. James agreed but insisted on security. A bodyguard would accompany them, staying discreet but present. Daniel felt weird about that, but he understood. That Saturday, Daniel picked up Lily in the town car that James had arranged. She bounced in her seat the whole way, pressing her face to the window and asking about every building they passed. That's the library. I practically live there during finals week. And that's the engineering building where my classes are. And over there is the dining hall, which serves food that's better than you'd expect but not as good as your chef makes. Lily giggled. Can I see your apartment sometime? It's not very exciting. Just a small place with too many books and a futon that's seen better days. But it's yours. You chose it. You decorated it yourself, right? Daniel had never thought about it that way. I guess so. There's not much decorating. Just posters and stuff. That sounds perfect. At the science fair, Lily was in heaven. She asked the college students about every project, taking it all seriously even though she was 8 years old. Daniel watched her examine a solar panel demonstration, asking questions about photovoltaic cells that impressed the senior presenting it. You're really smart, the senior told Lily. Are you interested in science? I think so, Lily said shyly. I want to learn about everything. That's the best attitude to have. Keep asking questions. On the way back to the estate, Lily was quiet, looking thoughtful. Daniel, she finally said, yeah? Do you think I could be an engineer someday? Like you? If you want to be. You could be anything you want, Lily. But I'm supposed to run my parents' company when I grow up. Uncle James says I have responsibilities. Daniel chose his words carefully. Having responsibilities doesn't mean giving up your dreams. Maybe you could run the company and be an engineer, or maybe you'll find a different path. You're 8. You have time to figure it out. Do you think my parents would be disappointed if I didn't want to run the company? The question broke Daniel's heart a little. I think your parents would want you to be happy and kind and true to yourself. Everything else is just details, Lily smiled. It was the kind of smile that made everything worth it. Over the next few weeks, Daniel fell into a rhythm. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons at the estate. Homework help, conversations about science and life, and sometimes just playing board games or talking about nothing important. Lily started opening up more, talking about her parents, her fears, her dreams. But Daniel also started noticing things. Tension in the household. Whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Cold looks from some of the staff and a few family members who occasionally visited. One afternoon, he overheard 2 women talking in the hallway. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but they were right outside the room where he was setting up for Lily's lesson. It's inappropriate, one woman said. James bringing in some random college boy and giving him access to Lily. He's being paid a fortune, I heard. $2,000 a week for what? Playing games with an 8-year-old? Mark my words, this boy's after the money. He'll find a way to get more out of them. Daniel felt his face burn. He wanted to walk out there and defend himself, but what would that accomplish? Instead, he stayed quiet and focused on being the best mentor he could be. Because at the end of the day, Lily was what mattered. And Lily was thriving, at least that's what Daniel thought. He had no idea that someone in the house was watching him very carefully, and that soon, everything he'd built would be threatened by accusations he never saw coming. 6 months had passed since Daniel started working with Lily, and the change in her was remarkable. She laughed more, asked endless questions about the world, and had started talking about wanting to study robotics when she got older. Her therapist told James that Lily was doing better than anyone had hoped. For Daniel, life had also transformed. He'd quit the convenience store job and could finally focus on his classes. His grades had improved, and he'd even joined a research project on sustainable energy systems. He sent money home to his mom every month, and his sister had started talking about college herself, inspired by his success. But not everything was perfect. The whispers and cold looks at the estate had gotten worse. Some of James's relatives made pointed comments about outsiders whenever Daniel was around. A few of the household staff treated him like he didn't belong, even though he was nothing but polite to everyone. Daniel tried to ignore it. He was there for Lily, not to make friends with people who'd already decided they didn't like him. Then the article came out. Daniel was in his engineering class when his phone started buzzing with texts. He ignored it until the lecture ended, then checked his messages. His roommate from freshman year had sent him a link with just one word. Dude. Daniel clicked the link. It was a tabloid website, and the headline made his stomach drop. Mystery man in Westbrook heiress's life. Who is Daniel Rodriguez and what does he want? Below the headline was a photo of him and Lily at the campus science fair, taken from a distance. The article was full of speculation and barely disguised accusations. It called him a fortune hunter and questioned why a wealthy family would let a struggling college student with nothing to his name have so much access to their orphaned heiress. The article had dug into his background. His father's death, his mother's jobs, his student loans, his tiny apartment. Everything was presented in the worst possible light, suggesting he was desperate for money and had latched onto Lily as his meal ticket. Daniel felt sick. He'd been so careful. He'd never taken photos of Lily, never told anyone about his job, never posted anything on social media. Someone had leaked this information and given photos to the press. His phone rang. It was Richard, the family attorney. Daniel, don't panic, Richard said immediately. We're handling this. How did they get this information? I signed an NDA. I never told anyone. We're investigating, but right now, I need you to not speak to any reporters. They'll probably try to contact you. Don't respond, don't comment, just refer them to me. Is Lily okay? She's confused and upset. She doesn't understand why people are saying mean things about you. James is with her now. After the call ended, Daniel sat in his car in the parking lot trying to process what was happening. His phone kept buzzing. Friend requests from strangers on social media, emails from reporters, text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. He turned off his phone and drove home, but there were two people with cameras waiting outside his apartment building. Daniel kept driving, unsure where to go. He ended up at the library, hiding in a study room until evening. When he finally got home late that night, the reporters were gone, but there was a note on his door. "Call me ASAP," with Richard's number. Daniel called from his apartment landline, which he barely ever used. "We need you to come to the estate tomorrow," Richard said. "There's going to be a family meeting about the situation. James wants you there." The next day, Daniel drove through the estate gates with a knot in his stomach. The usual staff member who greeted him at the door was cold and formal, not making eye contact. She led him to a large conference room he'd never been in before. James was there, along with Richard and Catherine. But there were also 5 other people Daniel had only met briefly at occasional dinners. James's cousins and their spouses, members of the extended Westbrook family who served on various boards and committees for the estate and company. The temperature in the room could have frozen water. James gestured for Daniel to sit next to him. "Thank you for coming." One of the cousins, a woman in her 50s named Victoria, didn't waste time. "This is unacceptable, James. The family is being dragged through the tabloids because of your poor judgment." "My judgment has been fine," James said calmly. "Daniel has been excellent for Lily. Has he?" Another cousin, a man named Philip, cut in. "Or has he been excellent for his bank account? $2,000 a week for babysitting?" "I'm mentoring and tutoring," Daniel said quietly. "Not babysitting." "Oh, he speaks," Victoria said coldly. "Tell me, Daniel, what exactly are your qualifications for this position? A college degree you don't have yet? Experience you don't possess?" "Victoria, that's enough," James warned. "No, James, it's not enough. We've been patient with this arrangement, but now it's affecting the family's reputation. There are questions about Lily's trust, about whether she's being properly cared for, about whether this boy is exerting undue influence." "That's ridiculous," James said. "Daniel has been nothing but professional and kind to Lily." "Then why is he in a tabloid?" Philip demanded. "Why are there photos of him with Lily in public? This screams poor judgment at best, exploitation at worst." Daniel felt his temper rising but forced himself to stay calm. "I never wanted any of this. I signed an NDA. I've never talked to press or posted anything about Lily. Someone leaked that information. And you have no idea who." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "How convenient." "That's enough," James said firmly, standing up. "I called this meeting to inform the family that I'm standing by Daniel and my decision to have him in Lily's life, not to put him on trial." "Then you're making a mistake," Victoria said. "James, we respect that you're Lily's guardian, but you're not thinking clearly. This boy rescued Lily, and you're so grateful that you've lost perspective. He's not qualified for this role, and now he's a liability." Richard spoke up. "I'd like to point out that we've investigated the source of the leak. It came from someone within the household." The room went silent. "We traced the photos and information back to a staff member who was paid by the tabloid for the story," Richard continued. "That person has been terminated and is facing legal action for violating their own NDA." "That doesn't change the fundamental problem," Philip said. "The story is out there. Damage is done, and it raises legitimate questions about this arrangement." "Questions like what?" James asked, his voice hard. "Like what happens when this boy graduates and moves on," Victoria said. "Lily is already attached to him. What happens when he leaves? Another loss for her to deal with? Or what if he doesn't leave?" Philip added, "What if he sticks around, waiting for Lily to turn 18 and gain access to her fortune? Grooming her for years?" Daniel shot to his feet, his chair scraping back. "That's disgusting." "I would never—" "Sit down, both of you," James commanded. "Philip, that accusation is out of line and you know it." "Daniel, please." Daniel sat back down, his hands shaking with anger. "Here's what's going to happen," James said. "Daniel will continue working with Lily for as long as it benefits her. The family will release a statement supporting this decision, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me directly." "You're being short-sighted," Victoria said. "I'm being a parent," James shot back. "Something none of you have to do for Lily. I do. And I'm telling you that Daniel has been the best thing to happen to her since we lost Robert and Diana. After the meeting, James asked Daniel to stay back while the others left. The room felt heavy with tension. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," James said, rubbing his temples. "Is it true what they said? Am I making things worse for Lily?" "No, you're making things better. Victoria and Philip are upset because they've never liked that I'm Lily's guardian instead of them. They're on the board of trustees for her inheritance, and they question every decision I make. This article just gave them ammunition." "Maybe I should step back," Daniel said. "I don't want to cause problems for you or Lily. If you step back, they win. And Lily loses the one person in her life who treats her like a normal kid instead of a bank account." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I miss when this was simple, when I was just helping a kid with homework." "Nothing involving billions of dollars is ever simple," James said. "But Daniel, I need you to know something. I trust you completely, not just with Lily's education, but with her well-being. You've brought light back into her life. Please don't let bitter people take that away." Daniel wanted to walk away from all of it, the accusations, the scrutiny, the family drama. But then he thought about Lily, about her excitement when she learned something new, about the way she'd started talking about the future with hope instead of just sadness about the past. "Okay," Daniel said. "I'll stay." Over the next few weeks, Daniel learned to live with the weirdness of being semi-famous in the worst way. The tabloid story had spread online, and there were Reddit threads and Twitter discussions about him. Most people defended him, but enough didn't that it was uncomfortable. He stopped reading about himself online. He focused on his classes and his time with Lily, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. One afternoon, while helping Lily with a math problem, she pulled out a folder of papers she'd found in her uncle's study. "I don't understand these numbers," she said, showing them to Daniel. Daniel looked at the papers and frowned. They were financial statements for Lily's trust. Normally he wouldn't pay attention to such things, but something caught his eye. There were regular transfers out of the trust to accounts he didn't recognize. Large transfers, millions of dollars over the past 2 years. "Where did you get these?" Daniel asked carefully. "They were on Uncle James's desk. I thought they were school papers. Are they important?" Daniel's mind raced. These transfers had started before James even became Lily's guardian, which meant they'd happened while Robert and Diana were still alive. But why would they authorize moving millions out of their daughter's trust? Unless they hadn't authorized it. Daniel carefully photographed the papers with his phone before Lily put them back. "These are grown-up papers. Let's focus on your math, okay?" But that night Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept looking at those photos, trying to understand what he was seeing. His engineering brain was good with numbers and patterns, and the pattern here was clear. Someone had been systematically moving money out of Lily's trust for years. He didn't know what to do with this information. Should he tell James? What if James was somehow involved? What if Daniel was wrong and these were legitimate transfers that he just didn't understand? But what if he was right? What if someone was stealing from Lily? And everyone was too focused on attacking Daniel to notice. Daniel realized he was at a crossroads. He could ignore what he'd seen and keep his head down, or he could speak up and risk making everything worse. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "When you see something wrong, you don't look away just because it's easier." Daniel knew what he had to do. The question was whether anyone would believe him, and whether speaking up would cost him everything he'd built, including his relationship with the little girl who'd become like family to him. Daniel spent 3 days researching financial fraud, trust fund regulations, and estate law. He barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. The numbers in those photos kept running through his mind. $43 million. That's how much had been moved out of Lily's trust over 2 years in small, regular transfers designed not to trigger automatic alerts. He knew he had to tell James, but he needed to be sure first. If he was wrong, he'd look like an idiot. If he was right but couldn't prove it, he'd look like a troublemaker. Either way, this could blow up in his face. Finally, Daniel asked to meet with James privately. They met in James's study on a Sunday evening when Lily was at a friend's house for a supervised playdate. "What's this about?" James asked, gesturing for Daniel to sit. "You sounded serious on the phone." Daniel pulled out his laptop and opened the photos he'd taken. "Lily found some papers a few days ago. Financial statements from her trust. I probably shouldn't have looked, but I did, and I saw something that bothered me." He turned the laptop so James could see. These transfers, they've been happening for over 2 years. Small enough not to trigger major alerts but consistent. They add up to over $40 million. James leaned forward, studying the screen. His face went pale. Where did Lily find these? She said on your desk. She thought they were something else. I've never seen these statements before, James said quietly. The trust sends quarterly summaries to the guardians and trustees, but these are detailed transaction records. Someone would have to request these specifically. Or someone with access to the trust accounts could generate them, Daniel suggested carefully. James was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. You think someone is embezzling from Lily's trust? I think someone might be. I'm not an expert, but these transfers don't look right. They're going to accounts I can't identify, and the amounts follow a pattern that seems designed to stay under the radar. James stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the darkening garden. Do you know what you're suggesting? If you're right, it means someone I trust, someone who has access to my niece's money, has been stealing from her. I know. That's why I waited to tell you. I wanted to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. And if you're wrong, if there's a legitimate explanation, then I'll apologize and drop it. But James, if I'm right and I didn't say anything, I couldn't live with myself. James turned back to face him. After everything my family has put you through, why do you care? You could walk away from all of this drama. Because Lily deserves better. She already lost her parents. She shouldn't lose her inheritance too. Something in James's expression softened. Robert would have liked you. He always said that character matters more than credentials. The next morning, James brought in forensic accountants. He told the family he was doing a routine audit of Lily's trust, just to ensure everything was properly managed. Several trustees and family members grumbled about the expense and hassle, but James was firm. Daniel tried to stay out of it and focus on his normal routine with Lily, but the tension in the house was obvious. Staff members whispered in corners. Family members called at odd hours. Something was happening. 2 weeks later, James called an emergency family meeting. This time, there were even more people in the conference room. All the trustees, several board members from the family company, and the estate's legal team. Daniel wasn't invited, but James called him afterward. We found it, James said, his voice tight with anger. You were right. The CFO of the estate and one of the trustees have been embezzling money from Lily's trust for almost 3 years. They started small while Robert and Diana were alive, then got bolder after they died, thinking I wouldn't notice in all the chaos. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Being right didn't feel good. How much? $47 million total. They moved it through shell companies and offshore accounts. They were planning to disappear in about 6 months before Lily's 10th birthday, when the trust undergoes a major review. What happens now? Criminal charges, civil suits. We'll recover most of the money, but the damage to the family's trust in each other. James sighed. That's harder to fix. I'm sorry. Don't be. You potentially saved Lily tens of millions of dollars. More importantly, you showed me that I needed to be more careful about who I trust. There was a pause. Then James said, The family wants to meet with you again. Daniel's heart sank. Let me guess. They blame me for causing trouble. Actually, no. They want to thank you. Well, most of them do. Victoria and Philip are still difficult, but they're in the minority now. The meeting was surreal. Family members who'd been cold to Daniel weeks earlier now shook his hand and thanked him. Richard announced that the family wanted to give Daniel a reward for his vigilance, but Daniel refused. I didn't do this for money, he said firmly. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Then let us pay for your graduate school, James suggested. You're graduating soon, right? Let the Westbrook Foundation fund your master's degree in engineering. Daniel wanted to refuse on principle, but his mother's voice was in his head again. You deserve opportunities. He accepted. After the meeting, James asked Daniel to come to his study again. I have another proposition for you, he said. And before you say no, just hear me out. Okay.